Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. I am driving back from Atlanta where some friends and I went to go climbing at Stone Summit. If you don't know Stone Summit and you like to climb, it's a pretty cool place. I wish it wasn't quite so far away, but active climbing in Athens is super awesome too, but Stone Summit is kind of world-class indoor climbing. Anyway, so I'm driving home, got it on autopilot, got my hands on the autopilot, but I'm in the HOV lane, and sorry, actually this is the Peach Pass lane at this point, but it's all a freebie because I'm driving an EV car, which is a nice bonus. But I wanted to talk quickly about the fact that the Model Y standard range has disappeared from Tesla's website, which happened, I believe it was yesterday that people caught that, and it's a very oddball kind of event. So I went back and looked, and I think it was January 6th. So approximately 6 weeks ago, they advertised the standard range Model Y, and at the time, remember I did an episode on that, and you can catch it up here if you're interested. But anyway, it at the time, I kind of debated whether or not it would have been a good or better idea for us to have purchased the standard range if it had been available. We of course got the long range, which has the dual motors as opposed to one motor, and it has the 75 kilowatt hour battery pack. I'm not sure. I think the standard range was 60, but I'm not positive. But anyway, it was definitely, my theory at the time was that they didn't do a standard range plus or a single motor long range because what they were after was trying to save the battery packs, right? So if you're only building a 60 kilowatt hour battery pack, you have 15 left over at the end of each one. So every 4 cars you build, you get a free battery pack for another standard range. So that was my theory. I was like, oh, that makes complete sense that one would do that, and you would have the benefit of being able to produce more cars and sell more cars. The counter to that maybe is that the car was about $10,000 cheaper than the long range. Now, what they've done in the meantime is they've dropped the long range by $1,000 off the price of the long range. But interestingly enough, if you also look at the website, the performance model, stuff in the road, sorry. If you look in the website, the performance model has actually gone up in price. So they dropped the long range and they upped the performance model, which is kind of weird. So now, if I'm remembering correctly, there's a $12,000 difference between the two automobiles, whereas it used to be a $10,000 difference. So that's an interesting factor too. Dropping $1,000 off the long range does not seem adequate to me in terms of justifying dropping the standard range model. I sort of have a theory that it was actually too popular, that the standard range was so popular that they basically just filled up their queue, and they won't be able to make enough of those because, of course, in addition to the battery pack, you also have to build the rest of the car. And currently the only place that's building these cars, well, Shanghai is starting to do this too, but Fremont, at least for the United States, and that's where I believe this model was advertised. I don't know in Europe and other places if it was actually advertised or not, ever. But at least in the United States, we're still only talking about Fremont that's making these cars. And so my thinking is, right, that there's kind of an exponential demand growth. So when you drop something by what is going from 50 to 40,000, it's about a 20% drop in price, right? So obviously you're getting less car for that money, but it's a 20% less expensive car. But you don't get 20% more demand for that car. It's actually kind of exponential. So they might actually have gotten twice as much demand for the standard range as they were getting for the long range. Hold on a sec. Got a police officer hanging out in just off of the Peach Pass lane. It's a little scary. I'm going to slow down a little bit and pass this guy. I would get over more, but it's a double white line, so I'm not really allowed to. So anyway, okay, so back at it. So anyway, I'm wondering whether the car wasn't too popular for its own good. So basically they're making less profit, obviously, because the bigger battery pack will cost more money, and certainly the bigger battery and also the 2 motors will cost more money, but it's not $10,000 more money. So let's say, just to be generous, it cost them $6,000 extra to build all those extra parts. They're still making $4,000 extra profit compared to, well, I guess $3,000 now because it's only $9,000 more expensive. But still, let's say they're making $3,000 extra per car. And if you're selling hundreds of thousands of cars, that is a big deal. So it just may have been the fact that the standard range was so popular, it created such a huge demand that they're going to fulfill that queue, but they essentially kind of built themselves a more or less of a waiting list. I'll be curious to see when people actually start taking delivery of that version of the car and what sort of wait times there are. It's unfortunate now because, of course, since they've removed it, you can't look anymore and see what the wait times are on the car. But my thinking is that what they'll do is they will front load the more expensive cars, so the performance model and the dual motor long range. They'll front load those two versions of the car, and they will try to get those into consumers' hands more rapidly than the standard range. So they will essentially, if you bought a standard range last week right before they took it offline, and let's say that the long range and the performance model delays are like 3 to 4 weeks right now, I could easily see that standard range being like 3 months or something. That they're just sort of like, we'll build a standard range whenever we get a chance to build a standard range, but we're not going to go out of our way to build extra standard ranges at the expense of building these more expensive cars. So I think that my guess, and again, I'm just speculating, I obviously have no inside information, but my speculation is that it is a victim of its own success. That the standard range was so popular that Tesla was like, we can't make enough cars right now. Potentially, when the new version of the standard range comes out, or long range, et cetera, comes out, sorry, navigation. So when the new version comes out from Giga Texas, I don't think Berlin is going to have anything to do with this, because I really don't think they're going to be shipping cars from Europe to the United States. That's highly unlikely. But I think what could happen is that they'll just wait until they get the new model cars ramped up in Texas. So let's say maybe a year from now before they really ramp it significantly. And when they do that, they will actually then perhaps reintroduce the standard range. But the standard range might be more like the car that I'm driving now. It was interesting. I was in Clubhouse yesterday, and Warren Redlick was there. And by the way, I think I'm doing an interview with him soon. So definitely look out for that. I'll post that on my channel so you can see that. But I'm excited about that. I'm excited. We're just going to have kind of a free-ranging conversation and see where it goes. Anyway, we were talking about that, and Warren was bringing up a really valid point, which is there's going to be this weird window when we'll have the Fremont-made Model Y, and Model 3 too, we can talk about that, but probably they're only going to make the Model Y for a period of time in Texas. But anyway, what they're going to have is this window of time before Giga Texas can super ramp up, where they're going to have to be producing the 2170 battery version of the Model Y, who knows, without maybe the unibody giga casting, et cetera, et cetera. But they'll also at that time be making a certain number of the 4680 cell versions with probably an entire underbody unitary giga casting. And so that car is going to be significantly better. It's probably going to be somewhere around 5% lighter is what people are guessing. 500 pounds, is that 5%? Somewhere around that. Anyway, so it's going to be significantly lighter, which means it'll get better range, but also, sorry, it's Atlanta, people are jerks. I put on my turn signal to get out of the way, and that guy just blasted right on past me. Anyway, so there'll be this weird dichotomy where they're going to have a product that they can manufacture for cheaper in the 4680 Model Y because it's a single underbody giga casting with the new cells. And at the same time, they'll have a more expensive but worse product in the Model Y that's being made in Fremont. In other words, this version right here. So they're going to have a very strange, I don't know. It's an Osborne effect, right? If you remember that the Osborne Computer Company went out of business in the early 1980s, or was it late 1970s? Anyway, they advertised the Osborne 2, and they were super excited. They were like, look how good this thing is. It'll be out in like a year. And everyone said, oh, I'll just wait a year. I'll wait 6 months to get this new version. And they didn't make any sales in the meantime, and they went out of business. So, Tesla has to be super careful about that. They have to make sure that they don't create a situation where people are so excited about their Giga Texas version. Again, I don't think that Berlin is going to be an issue, because I think that Berlin is not going to ship to the United States. So it's a whole different thing. And the first Model Ys, that are going to be European made will be made in Berlin with the 4680 cells. Everybody says that that's the most likely outcome. Now, of course, there could be issues in terms of the Model Y from the United States, which is currently being shipped to Europe and other places. And that's not going to be nearly as popular anymore, of course, because people are going to want to get the one that's made in Europe for a number of reasons. There's also tax breaks and things by having it made in Europe, etc. But again, I think there's so much demand in the United States and other markets that Tesla won't have a problem shipping those models out and fulfilling their orders. But the problem is, in the United States specifically, they're going to have this weird overlap starting at the end of this year or early 2022 for somewhere around a year or so until they are able to ramp up production of the Model Y 4680 Texas version enough that they can either go retool the Fremont factory or just shut it down. Or my thought is that the Fremont factory will eventually become the Model S, Model X, and Roadster factory. And so that may be why the Roadster, they're looking at like end of next year-ish, maybe early 2023, that they'll convert Fremont once Giga Texas is ramped fully and it's making all the Model Ys they can handle, plus Cybertrucks, etc., that they will convert the Fremont factory into more of a high-end, high-profit factory. And part of that's just the fact that California is really frigging expensive compared to Texas. Texas is a much, much cheaper place to manufacture automobiles because of taxes, union laws, etc. I'm not saying, it's bad for the workers, etc., but it's good for companies to be in Texas. So I think rather than just give up on Fremont entirely, I think that would be a mistake because they put in a ton of money creating this factory and getting it all robotized and everything. But I think it's going to get shrunk down in size and they're going to concentrate on making their high profit, high-end cars rather than making their more mass market, got to make a ton of them kind of cars, make them as cheaply as possible. I think that's going to be Texas. And quite frankly, I think there's going to be a new United States Gigafactory. Gosh, let's see. Giga Texas will open at the end of 2021. I would say within 2 years max. I would possibly say they might, as soon as this summer, announce a new United States factory. I'm all for not Austin, Texas. I'm all for Athens, Georgia, by the way, if they're looking for that, because Georgia is very, very similar to Texas in terms of being very business friendly, but it also puts it all on the East Coast. And so you have a West Coast, a Central America, or Central United States, and then an East Coast factory. And so it'd be perfect, right? So they could ship all of their East Coast stuff, and they could also start shipping things across the Atlantic or down across the Gulf of Mexico, down into South America, etc. So I think that would open up a full range if they put it on the East Coast. So Elon, if you're listening, you should definitely look at Athens, Georgia, or the in between Athens and Atlanta. I think that's the ideal place. There's a lot of very inexpensive real estate in that area. So that would be my, maybe that's just me because it's close to home and I think it's pretty cool. But everybody says Athens is Austin 30 years ago. So why not put in a gigafactory in Athens, Georgia? Anyway, so regardless of that part though, I think that it's going to be fine once they actually get everything ramped up and they are building as many Model Ys as they can in Texas. They're going to stop making Model Ys in Fremont. But there's a weird time period, and what are they going to do during the time period when they have both Fremont and Texas building Model Ys, but the Texas Model Ys are just significantly better? Now, I guess what they could do is but I don't think they're going to have enough 4680 cells. I was going to say what they could do is they could just close the Fremont factory line, the Model Y line down for a period of time, and they could shut it down and they could retool it to make that with the 4680 cells as well. But I don't think they're going to be able to produce enough 4680 cells to make that reasonably possible. So the other option is what they're going to have to do is almost take a loss on the ones that are being built. Or I guess optionally what they can do is they can make the Model Y in Texas, even though it costs less money, they could just artificially increase the price of the 4680 version. And to some extent you can argue that that's reasonable because what they're doing is they're paying off the development cost of the the 4680 battery cell line, right? So they've got to ramp that too. They've got to make that, they've got to develop it, and it costs a lot of money to ramp all of those battery production facilities. So they could justify charging more for the 4680, and in the meantime, they'll be making a great deal of profit. But I think what they'll have to do in the meantime is that they're going to have to really get down to kind of a razor thin profit margin on the Fremont made Model Y. Makes me a little bit sad because I love my car, but I do know that somewhere around a year from now, it's not going to be that great of a car anymore. It's going to be a very second class citizen compared to the Texas made Model Y. So anyway, that's I kind of wound around, but I think that the standard range, my personal opinion is that the standard range was a victim of its own success, and that they're not making enough profit on it, and they're thinking like, why should we take away, right? They're leeching off of their more expensive models to build the cheaper model, which is not as profitable and is super, super popular. And it just seems like that's really likely, because why wouldn't you want to get a car that's a lot cheaper if you don't need the range or you don't need the performance of having dual motors? There's a great deal to be said about saving 10 grand. For one thing, if you want to get the Autopilot, that buys you the Autopilot right there. So that's a huge aspect of it also. So anyway, I think that it's a victim of its own success, and that's why it's gone. It is possible that they might bring it back. They might resurrect it for a little while. But I think what they're going to do is they're going to make an attempt to keep lowering the price of the long-range Model Y instead. I think what you're going to see is the performance is going to keep ticking up and the long range is going to keep ticking down, or the performance will stay where it is and the long range will tick down, because eventually, right, they just reduced it by $1,000. So if they can reduce it by another $4,000 or $5,000 in the next year before Giga Texas really gets rolling, then we're going to be talking about it being not that much more expensive than the single motor version was, and you're getting 244, so about 80 miles more range and a much higher performance. It accelerates much faster, and of course it drives better in bad weather, etc. But I, for one, don't particularly care because I live in an environment where I don't really need four-wheel drive that much. So anyway, that's what I think. I think it's a victim of its own success. But I also think it's going to be a really fascinating thing to see how they manage this transition to the 4680 and significantly better, longer range Model Ys. My personal opinion is that they will keep moving the Fremont-made Model Y down as low as they can get it. And at the same time, at the beginning, they will artificially inflate the Giga Texas Model Y for a period of time until they can pretty much manufacture all the Model Ys they need to. I don't know, that may never happen. But anyway, until they can basically shut down Fremont, either to retool the Fremont line to bring it up to spec with the Texas line, or alternatively, like I said, just turn it into a Model S, Model X Roadster version. And then they will get rid of the Model Y, and then they can start reducing the price of the Texas-made 4680 Model Y, as they go. So that's several years worth of projections here, and honestly, Tesla may not know what they're thinking at this point, by the way. So it's possible that Tesla is like, well, we think we're going to do this, but they may change their minds, and it seems like this whole decision to pull the standard range was that kind of a thing too. They may have been like, this seemed like a good idea, but now we're like, oh crap, that's a really bad idea. Also, as a little bit of a tangent, I was watching the Sandy Munro Cory, his buddy, his sidekick Cory, their recap of their trip to California and Texas, and him talking to Elon Musk, etc. And I was really interested. I'm going to talk about the SpaceX aspect of it in a different video because there's some really fascinating information in that. But I did want to make a note about the fact that Sandy has the similar complaint that I do, which is that the car, the Tesla, when you put it into Autopilot, is extremely rigid about going right down the center of the road. And in a right-hand driving country, I think that all of us by instinct, kind of what Sandy was calling it, right biasing, and I'd never heard that term before, but that's a really good term for it. Essentially what we do is we ride a little bit over to the right of the lane in a two-lane road where we're both going the same direction, because you're trying to stay further, actually even in a two-lane road where the other traffic is coming the other way even more, because you're trying to give as much room as possible to the other cars, because you don't want to accidentally smack into them if they weave out of their lane a little bit and come into yours. There's more of a buffer. And generally speaking, things don't too much happen on the right-hand side of the road where it's just a shoulder. It can, obviously, deer could be there or people or something, but in general, it's not as much activity going on the right as the left. And so what you do is you bias it, you move over to the right. And I'm looking at my car right now, which is autopilot driving, and it is, I would say, you know, half a meter, which would be about 1.5 feet, too far to the left for my comfort. It should be like a half a meter that direction. So the whole car should be shifted over like this. And it's unfortunate that it's not, because it creates a situation where it makes me very nervous, because other cars sometimes feel too close to me on that side. But of course, if I move the steering wheel to push the car over, it comes out of autopilot. So that's unfortunate. The other aspect that Sandy talked about, which I've also definitely noticed, is that I don't know if it's just if you've been racing trained or not, but if you go around a sharp bend, not like a real slow sweeping turn like what I'm doing right now, but if you go around a bend that's got a pretty sharp turn, what you do is you kind of, I guess, apex bias. So what you do is you start on the far right of the lane, again, driving in a right-hand country. You start on the far right of the lane. As you get to the peak of the turn, you push in all the way, maybe even a little bit over the line on the other side, and then you push out to the far right as you get through it. So basically, it's right-hand side of the lane, left-hand side of the lane, right-hand side of the lane. And the reason you do that is because you are flattening the curve out, right? So instead of the curve being this sharp, you're making the curve kind of this sharp. And so that lessening of the sharpness means that you can take the turn at a higher speed, and it also means that you are being more efficient going through the turn, because the more friction you're putting, the more sideways friction you're putting on the tires going through a turn, the less you're moving the car forward. You're actually, effectively braking the car. You're not braking, braking, braking. You're applying the brakes, because the force of the car is going out sideways instead of forward into the direction of motion. So you're reducing the efficiency of the car, and you're also putting a lot more force on the car side to side, which means you could roll it. Obviously, you're not going to do that with a Model Y or something like that. Under the circuit, man, it really doesn't like being in construction zones. I do have my hand on the steering wheel right now. It just doesn't like that. But anyway, I think it's really important to note that Sandy also noticed that the Tesla Autopilot, at least the version we have, again, I hope that the beta version is significantly better than that, but the version that we have currently is it stays right in the middle of the lane all the way through the turn. So effectively what happens is you're not flattening the turn out at all. You're only making the turn exactly as sharp as what it is on the road. So it just means it's a little less efficient, but also for those of us who have any kind of racing car driving experience, or at least driving fast or anything like that, who thought about it, how about that? It causes mental problems, because you're like, that's not the right way to take that turn. And so sometimes it feels too forceful. It feels like it's too far to the left when it starts the turn. It's too far to the right in the middle of the turn. It's too far to the left at the end of the turn. So it's unfortunate. So again, right-hand biasing and turning in, flattening the curve out by starting at the right, apexing at the left, and ending at the right, I hope is going to be in the beta version of the software. If not, it's going to be really disappointing. But I thought I would throw that in, and again, I can't wait to talk about the SpaceX part of their talk in a future episode. At any rate, those are my thoughts, rambling as they are. That's what happens when you drive long distances. And I'm stopped right now so I can wave around my hands. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please do make sure you like and subscribe. And also check out the comments for Patreon link, and you can join the fun with Patreon. They're a wonderful group of people. So thank you all so much for my Patreon folks. Also check out our Tesla and Amazon links, and definitely don't forget about our merch store, which has the all input is error and our model plaid t-shirts, etc. In the meantime, please do feel free to ask me questions in the comments or at my email address, which is drknowitallknows@gmail.com. Till next time, bye-bye.